They were supposed to be America's hidden guardians. A state defense militia with decades-long traditions, responsible for emergency response, cyber defense coordination, and state infrastructure oversight. But in July 2025, everything changed. Sensitive internal communications, emergency mobilization plans, personnel rosters, intelligence briefings, all exposed, not by accident, by a hacker group calling themselves Salt Typhoon. Tonight, we go inside the breach that laid bare a militia's guarded secrets, because when cyber war reaches the armories, you know we've crossed the line. The day the militia's walls fell, July 14, 2025. At exactly 2:17 p.m. local time, the state's Cybersecurity Operations Center received a blip, then a second. What started as a routine anomaly report quickly escalated into a red alert cascade. The source? Unusual outbound traffic from a compartmentalized enclave, one specifically walled off for incident response drills, war-gamed contingencies, and secure interagency comms. A strange PowerShell script, deliberately obfuscated, had quietly wormed its way across segmented VLANs. No signatures matched, no alerts had fired beforehand. But now, gigabytes of encrypted data were flowing out toward an unlisted IP block routed through Eastern Europe. At 2:23 p.m., audit logs started to stutter. Command line entries flickered and vanished in real time. Two-factor credentials failed mid-session. Then the enclave sealed itself, automated isolation protocols kicking in far too late. Inside the war room, cyber defenders stared at blinking terminals, speechless. This wasn't just a policy violation or a misconfigured appliance. This was a surgical compromise, one aimed directly at the state's digital spine. By 2:45, most internal dashboards went dead. The cold start plans? Gone. Mobilization triggers? Wiped or scrambled. Emergency dispatch protocols? Bricked. Teams switched to analog backups and burner phones. But by then, it was already too late. That evening, an anonymous leak site went live. Title screen: Salt Typhoon presents Guarded Secrets. Download links appeared. Classified documents flooded the darknet. And with them, the realization: the walls that were supposed to hold had collapsed, and everyone inside? Exposed. Who is Salt Typhoon? They weren't on any list, not in the databases of U.S. counterintelligence. No hits in SIGINT. No historical breaches tied to their name. Not even a whisper on the usual encrypted channels, where hacktivist crews and state-sponsored actors occasionally boast or recruit. In short, Salt Typhoon didn't exist until they did. Their debut wasn't subtle. Among the first leaked files, personnel dossiers on high-ranking militia members, names, addresses, and psychological fitness reports. Encrypted dispatch codes tied to emergency activations. A full register of active security clearances mapped to color-coded compartment levels. Confidential interoperability plans between state police, National Guard, and even regional utilities. Then came the crown jewel: internal schematics of the state's resilience infrastructure, data flow, critical node redundancy, and fallback lines for crisis communications. They hadn't just broken into a secure system, they'd waltzed through the cyber equivalent of a fortified bunker. As the digital dust settled, analysts scrambled to profile the attackers. Was Salt Typhoon a politically motivated hacktivist collective hitting back against overreach? Or something more calculated, a nation-state probing American domestic defenses? Some suspected a hybrid attack, insiders enabling outsiders. Fueling this theory was a strange post in Salt Typhoon's leak drop, job listings for emergency fuel logistics personnel, labeled top secret, citing deployment dates and operational radii. That phrasing? It precisely matched revision-tagged documents scheduled for internal review in August 2025. They weren't just random intruders. Whoever Salt Typhoon was, they knew where to look. and what was coming next. How we got in. The breach wasn't a smash and grab. It was surgical, methodical, tailored. Forensics teams would later piece together a chilling timeline of intrusion, layer by layer, step by step. It started quietly, with spearphishing emails aimed at senior militia officers. These weren't your garden variety scams. The attackers cloned official intergovernmental domains, down to SSL certificates, footer signatures, even reply chain formatting. The subject lines referenced ongoing disaster coordination exercises, making them nearly indistinguishable from real internal chatter. When attachments were opened, a lightweight memory-resident loader was deployed, identified post-mortem as Cyclone Drop. Small footprint, custom-built, and persistent. Once it landed, it embedded itself silently, surviving reboots and masquerading as a benign system utility. From those compromised endpoints, the attackers initiated lateral movement. Using stolen Kerberos service tickets, gleaned through a targeted pass-the-ticket attack, they moved from user machines to higher trust systems within segmented VLANs. A breakthrough came when they discovered misconfigured SMB shares in undersecured conference rooms. These shares held operational spreadsheets, evacuation protocols, response drills, even a plaintext archive of activation schedules. When Salt Typhoon realized that log coverage across enclaves was inconsistent, they escalated. A zero-day exploit targeting a privilege misconfiguration in the enclave's authentication module allowed them to disable key monitoring agents without triggering alerts. Data exfiltration began during off-peak hours, staggered across low-traffic intervals to blend in. Then came the erasure. JAR execution logs wiped, registry keys scrubbed, PowerShell binaries renamed to system-sounding labels and buried deep in temp folders. By the afternoon of July 14th, the command portals weren't just compromised, they were hollowed out. What was exposed? Once decrypted, the contents of the breach read like a blueprint for dismantling the state's crisis response from the inside out. The leaked archive, an estimated 3.1 terabytes, wasn't just sensitive, it was surgical in its breadth, and every byte was classified secret or higher. Among the first confirmed materials, mobilization playbooks detailing activation protocols, facility muster plans, emergency call-up codes, and digital schematics for accessing secure armory vaults. Response maps, including critical infrastructure prioritization, utility failover sequences, and location data for mutual aid compacts and pre-staged emergency resource sites. Personnel logs, thousands of entries, names, ranks, social security numbers, fitness evaluations, security clearance levels, and even family emergency contacts. Classified intelligence briefs, data shared with DHS and regional fusion centers identifying and profiling domestic extremist threats, some of whom were under active surveillance. Interagency email threads, high-trust back-and-forth memos between state police cyber units, National Guard liaisons, and intelligence analysts coordinating defensive posture assessments. Cloud credentials, full API key dumps granting access to emergency systems like evacuation route management platforms, weather alert overlays, and supply chain dashboards. Salt Typhoon didn't leak everything, but what they did post was targeted and deliberate. One highlight, a 45-page internal document labeled Fuel Logistics, Phase 3, detailing movement of combustible reserves under martial law scenarios. Others included a full deployment roster, an infrastructure vulnerability reference thread, and a spreadsheet mapping clearance tiers by command division. Not just embarrassing, exploitable, now public. Immediate impacts. This wasn't a theoretical breach. It didn't just live in classified inboxes or analyst briefings. By sunrise on July 15th, the fallout was already in motion. Emergency response drills were canceled statewide, paused indefinitely as officials scrambled to determine what procedures had been compromised. Some training exercises were mid-cycle when the order came to halt. Mobilization codes were revoked en masse, requiring full credential resets. That alone delayed personnel and asset deployment to wildfire containment zones in the northern districts by over 36 hours. FEMA liaisons suspended active communication, citing compromised email bridges and shared cloud assets that could no longer be trusted. Incident coordination reverted to landlines and encrypted SMS as a stopgap. State law enforcement disconnected from digital coordination tools, including dispatch overlays and live tactical briefings, until federated credentials could be rotated. For 48 hours, everything moved slower, handwritten, hand-delivered, or not at all. A public statement was issued mid-morning. A cyber incident has affected internal operational capability. No public infrastructure is at risk. Technically accurate, practically misleading. Behind the scenes, command centers reverted to printed charts, physical maps, and offline archives. Teams worked from outdated PDFs and multiple, conflicting document versions. Real-time updates became guesswork. All interagency data federations, transport, utility, public safety, were suspended pending security reassessment. The breach wasn't just about data, it was about trust. One internal operations lead summed it up with deadpan clarity. They turned our playbook inside out and left the field exposed. The recovery process. The restoration began immediately. But recovery? That would take longer. Over the course of 4 tense, relentless weeks, state and federal cyber teams worked around the clock. Affected networks were quarantined, their nodes severed from shared trust domains. Forensics teams dissected packet captures, frame by frame, hunting for indicators of persistence. Offline data centers were re-imaged from bare metal. System firmware was audited, drivers purged, patches reapplied. All privileged accounts were revoked and rebuilt under new security governance models. Kerberos authentication infrastructure was nuked and reconstructed from scratch. Tickets, trusts, policies, rewritten and retested under watchful eyes. Mobile devices across the force were re-enrolled. Each underwent recertification via hardened certificate authorities, with new compliance profiles pushed remotely. Zero-trust segmentation frameworks were implemented, not just at the cloud edge but across VLANs, internal assets, even individual containers. Lateral movement was no longer assumed possible. UN-sanctioned third-party contractors, under DHS cyber oversight, were deployed to perform exhaustive code audits and implant scans. They brought wartime tools, normally reserved for federal breach response. Technically, the environment stabilized, but trust that remained fractured. Personnel morale took a sizable hit. Some officers questioned leadership. Others feared personal data exposure. The state's security posture became a political football, debated in hearings and press briefings. Public confidence cratered. Some counties withdrew from mutual aid agreements, citing risk exposure. Insurance firms flagged the militia as high risk, reshaping liability clauses for future emergency deployments. The breach had been sealed, but the scar tissue remained. Who stood to gain? Speculation soared. Some named foreign adversaries seeking reconnaissance on domestic resilience systems. Or insider extortion, someone planting seeds for future leverage. Possibly a radical hacktivist message aimed at forcing transparency in militia operations. Salt Typhoon never claimed political motive. They simply posted, "We give you back your systems." But the secrets remain. No demands, no ransom note, no official press invoice, which meant their objective was disclosure. Some experts labeled it a psychological operation, expose the unexposed and leave them unprotected. One believed Salt Typhoon may have ties to a state-aligned intelligence operation, probing U.S. internal readiness. But intent remained masked behind their code. Whoever they were, they learned exactly what to leak. Lessons from the armories. Major takeaways. Don't underestimate insider threat risk. Even trusted staff can be phished. Spear phishing of senior officials became the Trojan horse. Network segmentation and least privilege weren't enough if misconfigured. Emergency infrastructure often lags in cybersecurity updates. It shouldn't. Zero-day defense monitoring must be real-time and redundant. Credential hygiene is vital, logging, key rotation, and Kerberos hygiene are non-negotiable. Psychological impact is as critical as technical, and soft targets become chain reactions. Security analysts across states began updating protocols. Department of Homeland Security mandated external red teaming. Governors formed oversight task forces, because if a militia can fall, that's a national alarm bell. Rebuilding trust. In the months that followed, legislature enacted the State Cyber Guard Modernization Act, mandating 90-day drills, piggybacking federal Computer Incident Response Center mandates. A citizen oversight board evaluated breach remediation and transparency. Emergency discretion protocols were modernized, with second-factor logins, secure offline fallback storages, and partial air-gapped enclaves. Interagency digital communication platforms moved entirely to new secure clouds with forward secrecy. But rebuilding trust wasn't quick. Personnel turnover surged. Elections debates questioned readiness. Defense subsidies for militia units were suspended pending audits. The message was clear. Lean defense without strong bio-cyber cross-resilience is fragile. If you thought state defense networks were sensitive, wait until you hear what happens when a hospital chain goes dark. Coming up on Season 2, HCRG. Care Group, a private provider of community health and social services. Medical data siege. Imagine your hospital systems locked, your medical records encrypted, and doctors forced to rely on pen, paper, and memory to save lives. Next episode, HCRG Care Group's Medical Data Siege, your private health data held hostage. Because when cyber attacks hit medicine, the stakes become life and death. We've entered a world where the most secure institutions can collapse in silence, not with force, not with bombs, but with keystrokes. Salt Typhoon didn't just expose documents, they exposed vulnerabilities, too deep to ignore. If you value security, transparency, or safety, like this video and subscribe, because what we investigate today might be the breach of tomorrow. Catch you next time on True Hacker Chronicles.